What is up, Los Angeles, and welcome back to Yo Rams LAFB show. I am your host, Ryan Anderson, joined today by Sosa Kremenjas over there at Underdog Fantasy. I'm having him on to talk about the Rams team needs, and it's a great time to do so. We've got free agency right around the corner, combine starting today on Monday. So lots to hash out here. But first off, Sosa, how are we doing in Toronto? Is it snowing there?
We got a little bit of snow. It's not that bad. I'm seeing there's a lot of places in the States that are getting absolutely dumped on. I'm going to cross my fingers, I think, and hope we're past the worst of it. I'm ready for springtime, but no, we're doing all right so far. Thank God.
Well, I was gonna pitch off the show with talking some hockey talk, but I found the one Canadian that isn't into hockey, so I can't razz him about U.S. hockey taking gold 2 times over Canada. But those uniforms were killer, and I think 3-on-3 hockey to decide it is probably not the way to go. I'll leave it at that. But we're talking team needs. We're talking Los Angeles Rams. No snow here in Los Angeles. Just to kick off the show, I labeled a few team needs, and I just wanted to run it down at the top just to go over it. Quarterback, I think, just because it's the most important position in football, and at some point Matthew Stafford will retire. I promise you guys. Wide receiver, obviously Puka Nacua is number 1 guy, Devontae number 2. Devontae's 33 years old, so they got to find a number 2 guy at some point. The big one everybody wants to hear about is cornerback. Secondary is going to get rebuilt. Les Snead is going to attack it. Pass rush depth I put on there just because the Rams were 31st in pass rush rotation in the league, and I felt like you could really tell that towards the end of the season with the production from those guys. Safety, I don't think they're returning. They're getting Cam Curl back. I think he played himself into a really big contract. Might hit a couple other things time dependent. But any thoughts on just kind of that list? Anything you would add to it or take away?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a pretty good list. It makes a lot of sense to me. Some people might be surprised to hear certain things like pass rush depth, for example. But I mean, in the NFL, there's more than enough proof that you can never have too many guys rushing the passer. I also think the Rams are in such a weird spot where it's a good spot, but it's also weird in the sense that they have to be able to kind of toe this line between going all in and really trying to capitalize on what probably is the last year of Matthew Stafford. And I could understand getting very aggressive there, obviously, and am very much in favor of that. But at the same time, this is now a team that has to, which always does, but has to look at the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the cap table and really figure out who do they want to pay and who do they want to prioritize keeping around. And based on some of these answers, we're going to have holes that aren't necessarily open on the roster today, but you generally plan to, draft players for the next 4 or 5 years, not just this year. So, then you talk about guys like pass rush depth with, Byron Young, for example, or, some of these offensive linemen. Like the Rams don't need an offensive lineman to start today, but in a year's time or 2 years' time, there's a lot of guys that are up to potentially leave. So to me, it makes a lot of sense in terms of the positions you touched on. I know a lot of people would hate to hear it, but I think tight end at some point is probably a need, not one I would go to early, but at any level of that defense, I think is going to be a need. And then offense, it's going to be more so planning for the future.
Yeah, offensive line was the one I went back and forth on a lot. And I think it is more of a future need. Especially at the interior. I'm wondering about Kevin Dotson's long-term ability to stay on the field for an entire season, but we'll get to that as well. So let's just start right there at the top. Quarterback, you're saying Matthew Stafford's probable last year. I'm right there with you. So do you have any thoughts on where they should go? Should, kind of the framing for this, I'm thinking is this a draft need, a free agency need, or a trade need? I think on this one, we could probably rule out trading for a guy. Jimmy Garoppolo, I think, is probably going to get taken. I think he's going to compete for a starting position somewhere across the league, just given how many quarterbacks there are or are not in the draft and how many needy teams there are out there. So where do you come down on quarterback? What kind of, where would you point to for that?
Yeah, this is a position that I think you have to look at the draft. Free agency, I don't see anything that sticks out to me that's of interest or of value. This could be a scenario where I would understand if they want to have another veteran once again, just like Jimmy G, in the event that, God forbid, Stafford gets hurt or something happens for a few games in the middle of the season. You don't want to have your championship season derail. So I could definitely see them wanting to have a experienced veteran quarterback behind Stafford for this season. But at some point, you got to start planning for the future. And this is going to be like the $1 million question for the Rams, right? Is that, do they want to go get McVay his first time having his own guy via the draft, a young player that he truly grabs from, nothing to moldable? Or do they want to just transition from Stafford eventually into another veteran quarterback, but we don't know who's going to be available, if anybody, at that time, at that point in time? So,
Yeah.
this is one situation I think they're going to have to look at the draft. Do they go the Stetson Bennett route and, draft a guy in the third, fourth, fifth round that is very, very unlikely to become a starting quarterback in the NFL and see if there's anything there? Or do they probably upset a lot of fans and go to Ty Simpson at 29? I wouldn't be against that personally. I think based on how important the position is, like, at some point you're gonna have to swing. My only question is, do they prefer the veteran route and they don't want to waste the picks on, or the early picks on guys that, that would be a fine scenario, or do they want to go the young route? The only problem with that is barring an absolute disaster or a throwaway season, the Rams are really never going to pick this high again, or
Yeah.
they shouldn't, at least. So, having that 13th pick in their back pocket, I think, allows them to really get aggressive at 29 if they feel that it's necessary. And I could be talked into Ty Simpson at that spot. I don't necessarily think it's going to happen, but it's not often you get 2 first-round picks. So I
Yep.
think that buys the Rams a little bit of ability to get aggressive. But at the end of the day, they could take a guy in the 3rd round, the 4th round, the 5th round. Some of these guys, that going into the season, I recall there was a lot of smoke around, is Cade Klubnik going to be a first rounder? Is Garrett Nussmeier going to be a first rounder? Drew Aller? We've talked about all these guys as potential first rounders, and it feels like we always do that, and then they never end up being first rounders. So there is some depth at the position that they could try to swing at and see if they could come away with, a spot starter type or a lower end starting quarterback type of player.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and I think Ty Simpson is a guy that I would take a risk on there at 29, just because I think he has the baseline mechanics pretty well, down. I think where he needs improvement is anticipation. He doesn't have the arm talent of Stafford. Not a lot of guys do, but I would say that he's got kind of that baseline. Just quarterbacking. The big knock is he's only played 15 games, always a big red flag. Sam Darnold was a guy that came into the league, didn't play a lot of football. There's a whole bunch of guys out there. So, but you're sitting behind Stafford for a year. And I think the way that the team has set up their offensive staff, with Nate Scheelhaas, Dave Ragone as co-offensive coordinators, Ragone, obviously the quarterback coach on the team, and then you got Cliff Kingsbury in there, where it's just a nice, perfect spot, it seems like, to go out and try to get a young quarterback. From the free agents, I'm with you. There's not a lot of guys that would take a swing on. Maybe Mariota's going to be around, maybe not. But I mean, Derek Carr, Derek Carr is a guy that I kind of landed on. Obviously, hasn't been in the league for a little while, but I don't know. That's kind of a stretch for me. But he's a guy that's won some games. Kind of that veteran Jimmy Garoppolo idea. So I don't know. Any thoughts on Derek Carr? Do you think that ship has sailed?
I mean, that's kind of the style of quarterback I would imagine that McVay would probably be interested in. For me, I just hate the thought of Sean McVay stepping back into the Jared Goff tier of quarterback. We've seen what he
Yeah.
could do with a Stafford, so I can only spend so much time imagining what he could do with a Mahomes, a Josh Allen, like one of these truly transcendent talent, talent types at quarterback. It's a lot easier to say than it is to go get. But to me, you're either swinging big at this point in time, or I would never anticipate for whoever they draft outside of the first round, if it's not Ty Simpson, to become a starting quarterback. And at that point, I think you're putting the eggs in the basket of moving up majorly next year in that draft, or, hoping a Justin Herbert, a Joe Burrow, one of these guys eventually is fed up with their situation and demands a trade, because we are in that kind of age in the NFL where players have a lot more ownership over essentially where they're at. And there's been enough smoke around the Joe Burrow stuff where a lot of fans are dead set on him being the next guy and stuff. So I think that's kind of the way it works for me.
Yeah, I love that you threw Justin Herbert in there. I think I would love to. That would ruffle some tail feathers for the sure out there. Let's jump to the big question: cornerback. How are they going to fix? How are they going to fix this room? I'm betting they're moving on from Darius Williams this year, saving $7.5 million against the cap if they move on from the 33-year-old Darius Williams. He was a healthy scratch a couple times this last year as well, so a lot of rebuilding there. I think they got to do kind of all of the above, draft, free agency, maybe a trade out there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think everything has to be on the table here. I agree. Darius Williams is 100% guaranteed to get cut with how his deal is currently structured. I probably wouldn't be all too interested in bringing anybody back that's a free agent. I believe Kobe Durant, Ahkello Witherspoon, I believe Darion Kendrick as well. That really only leaves Emmanuel Forbes at this point in time. To me, this is a position where you just have to remake it, remodel it from the ground up. And I think that starts with trying to figure out what is the ideal structure of this defense. What does it look like? Do they want to play more man? Do they want to continue to be zone heavy? And then that'll start to answer some questions in terms of best fit and body type that they're kind of going after. So for me, I've been a huge proponent of trying to potentially trade for a guy. Obviously, Trent McDuffie's one name I've mentioned many times on Twitter. That's going to be the one I'm kind of hoping comes through, depending on price. The Rams have traded for a 25-year-old star cornerback from Kansas City before. I wouldn't say it worked out all too well last time, but McDuffie's a guy that is just so good inside, outside. He's arguably the best nickel in football. He can play outside in a pinch and play pretty well. I don't think he's necessarily as good outside as he is inside, but 25 years old. He's from LA. He's already mentioned he wanted to play for the Rams years ago. So this is a guy that you plug, you forget about it, and you just let him do it. He's obviously got a championship pedigree as well. So that to me is the ideal route. Of course, I would call on Denzel Ward, see if Cleveland has any interest in potentially moving there. This is a guy that's getting up there in age. He's got a concussion history, so I understand the concern, but just a superstar player on the boundary as well. In terms of free agency, again, this kind of matters in terms of what they prefer from their defensive scheme. If they want to continue to play zone heavy, I think Jamel Dean makes a lot of sense. And a lot of people are going to, nitpick these guys and come up with reasons why the Rams shouldn't pay them. And that's definitely a fair case, in terms of Jamel Dean. He's 29 years old. He's getting up there in age. 30 is usually that fall off point for cornerbacks, so it's a reason to approach with caution. He's hurt, it seems, every single year, but that's why he's going to reach free agency. The superstar healthy 25-year-old types generally don't get there. So that's the one name I would probably circle if they wanted to continue to look towards playing a lot of zone. Good boundary guy. He's able to create turnovers. He's consistent as can be. He's not a top 5 guy, but you're exactly what you're getting with him. If they want to play a little bit more man, I would probably look towards like a Jalen Watson if they really want to spend up from KC as well. I believe he was a 7th round pick or undrafted guy. He's just a really good player on the boundary there. He's long. He can play press. He's physical. And then, it's just a lot of questions. Do they want to move Q Lake back to safety a little bit more and then go get a nickel type if that's a potential spot that they want to fill? On Alontae Taylor with inside outside flex makes a lot of sense. But these are some of the names that come with a sizable price tag, I presume, at least in terms of the free agent market. In terms of the draft, I think 13 is obviously a very easy spot for us to try to hope and pencil in a cornerback name. The only concern with me there is you're looking at Miami at 11, you're looking at Dallas at 12, and then you're looking at the Rams at 13. There's a very real possibility both of the top 2 corners are gone. Maybe not in the top 10, but at 11 and 12. So I'm currently expecting that Mansour Delane won't be available. I think he's probably the safest pick in the draft. He's just incredibly sticky in coverage. He's just an incredible player. To me, outside of something drastic or crazy in terms of injuries or something like that, I just don't really see any situation where he's not a top 10 cornerback in the NFL. And then, of course, the other name, Jermod McCoy out of Tennessee. He is the toolsiest, best traits kind of player at that position available. Of course, he didn't play this whole last season, coming off a torn ACL. The one benefit that there is to that, of course, he might be available at 13. Otherwise, I don't think there was a chance in hell that he would be available at 13 had he been healthy. And then the other benefit to that, too, is just by the time he's ready to play in the NFL, he'll have been a year and a half, if not longer, recovered from that torn ACL. So it's been a pretty long time since he tore it, which is ideal. So McCoy's the one I think is possible to reach 13. Delane, I'm not holding my breath on. I will say, though, this class is very intriguing at the cornerback spot. So, I would see a very real scenario where you address it one time in free agency or via trade, and then you address it at least once, if not twice again in the draft. You're going to be able to find guys that can, plug and play at nickel on day 2, potentially even early day 3. Obviously, D'Angelo Pons is a name I think most people are familiar with out of Indiana. He's just a tiny player, but he's an absolute gamer. You got a lot of guys that can play inside, outside, all kinds of different frames, body types. Avion Terrell, another name that could be potentially there at 29 or a little bit higher if the Rams want to move up and go get him. His brother's in the NFL, AJ Terrell for the Falcons. So just a lot of names there. I think based on the depth of the the draft class, I think you have to address one spot in free agency, and you feel pretty good about not having to pigeonhole something in the draft. And then you go into the draft and grab, 1 to 2 names and hope you can rebuild that room sort of on the fly like they did with that defensive line after Aaron Donald retired.
Yeah, that's exactly where my head is kind of rebuilding in a similar fashion, adding a lot of bodies over 2 years, trying to patch it as fast and as good as possible. I threw Colton Hood on my list there at 29. Obviously, you can't draft both Ty Simpson and Colton Hood at 29, but I picked him. I put him on there just simply because of his skills in man coverage. And I think that was something that really hurt the Rams, their inability based on size alone, with what they had last year in man coverage. Once Akella Witherspoon, it didn't seem like they could really play there. And I think Alontae Taylor might be a good steal. At cornerback and his ability to move inside, outside. And you brought up Quentin Lake. He played a ton of nickel last year when he was healthy. Obviously did really well as a safety too. And you bring him up as maybe not playing specifically nickel anymore. So let's just hop to the safety position. What are your thoughts on Cam Curl, getting him back, and any other guys that might fit?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. You said it, I believe earlier. I can't see a great chance that the Rams are going to be able to get Cam Curl back, and I think that's okay. He's played himself into quite a big deal. The Rams obviously chose to invest in Quentin Lake already, and they're not generally a team that pays a safety at all, never mind 2 players at the same time. So that's not a position that I would be all too keen on paying a bunch of money alongside, Quentin Lake. So for me, it's more of a question of, does Quentin Lake move back and play a little bit more safety and sort of, a more balanced split between how often he's in the slot and near the ball versus, how much is he going to play in the deep half type of situation. One of the benefits the Rams do have, I think, this year is, again, the safety class is pretty intriguing to me from a draft perspective. I'm seeing a lot of guys that could potentially be in play at 29. And then, of course, I think rounds 2, potentially round 3 is the one I more so have circled in round 2 for guys that are just very intriguing. And this really just depends on what the Rams are looking for at that safety spot. I imagine, they're going to want a guy that can play some split safety coverages, but a guy that probably will be closer to the box and play a little bit more of that strong safety, enforcer type, considering Cam Kinchins' skill set and Quentin Lake sort of being similar in that regard. There's obviously going to be an Emmanuel McNeil Warren that's potentially in play at 29. He's a really big player. A lot of people are going to probably comp him to Nick Eamon-Wari, which I would understand why. There's a lot of different names. I mean, Dylan Thieneman, AJ Halsey, Bud Clark is a name that did really well at the Senior Bowl. He's got a big he had a huge performance there. He's got a nose for the football. He's just a little bit more of that rangy type. I don't know if that's that necessarily what the Rams are going to want. And then there's some names too that have that kind of Quentin Lake style flexibility where they are sort of a nickel corner, sort of a safety at the same time. It's kind of a nickel safety type of role. Jalen Kilgore is a name there. There's one or two that I'm blanking on as well. But, free agency is not a spot that I would necessarily look and circle here for me personally. It feels like a very opportunistic time for the Rams to potentially go cheap there, but I would presume that Cam Crow is likely going to walk. And if that's the case, of course, you got your fingers crossed that he's going to get, as big a deal as possible to give you as high of a comp pick as possible.
Yeah, I circled a couple of guys in free agency. Nick Cross, he's that bigger body, more of the box player, used in pressure packages pretty regularly. And then Alohi Gilman, I'm curious about him because he's always played kind of the Robin to the Batman of Derwin James, and then also Kyle Hamilton. But he's also played in some of the best defensive systems. Brandon Staley, and then there with Jesse Minter, and of course Baltimore later on that year. So he's just played in so many systems and fit in all of them, and elevated the room across the board. So those are two free agents I'd keep an eye out. And then I keep coming back to Sonny Styles. I know he's listed as a linebacker, played some edge rusher, but he's an athletic freak, used to be a safety. If he's there at 13, it would be ridiculous for them to do it, but there's something about that positionless player who's big enough and fast enough to play multiple places. It would just make a lot of people angry, but I don't know. Like, can you talk yourself into that, or am I just completely off base?
I don't need any talking into it. I am very much in the camp of potentially targeting Sonny Styles at 13. I think, given how the Rams have constructed their roster and their linebacker room for so many years, it's just frustrating to see, year after year that they don't put any resources into it. Obviously, like you said, it's going to be hard to see it actually coming to fruition. I think the last time they took a linebacker in the first round was 2013 Alec Ogletree. Didn't necessarily work out great, but yeah, Styles is a guy that's just, he's positionless, like you said. Like, he is a former safety converted to linebacker. He's so athletic. I think he has such a high football IQ. He's going to test absolutely freaky, I believe, at the combine this week. That is the type of player that can, in my opinion, truly transform how a defense operates because of his ability to be so positionless and his flexibility and his sideline to sideline range and his true 3-down ability. The one thing I will mention on this topic too, we've talked about a few of the guys as well, was the Rams hiring Michael Hunter. He was a former assistant secondaries coach in Ohio State, if I'm not mistaken, and then just recently got hired in Tennessee. Lasted there 5 weeks before he joined the Rams as a DB's coach or an assistant DB's coach. I forget what the title was exactly, but this is obviously important because this is going to give you the rundown on Ohio State, Tennessee. There's a lot of first-round prospects between those teams. Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles, I guess Arvell Reese. He didn't necessarily coach him, but he's going to have, some good character checks on these guys and medicals and all that kind of background. Jermod McCoy out of Tennessee and Colton Hood out of Tennessee. That's 5 guys in the first round that, I'm going to be honest, I think is very, very interesting to think about because, yes, sure, he didn't coach any of the guys at Tennessee. He was only there for 5 weeks right before joining the Rams, but being in that program, he's going to know how these guys are recovering in terms of a Jermod McCoy in that knee. He's going to obviously know some of the character makeup and dedication of football and all that kind of stuff. And from these guys. And that's generally what this game is about, right? Everyone can play to some extent. It doesn't take a genius to look at the tape and understand who's good at what and what guys aren't necessarily great at, but you're betting on characters and people at the end of the day. So having that in on a lot of guys that are probably going to be in range at 13, I think is just so fascinating. And it's a big thing to not forget.
Nobody does selling better than Shopify. Shopify is the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret, with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts go abandoned and way more sales going through. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Skims uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period for 3 months at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
Well, and you bring up the coach, and I'm glad you did, because the team's never going to come out and tell you exactly what their plans are, but you can see kind of the breadcrumbs about how they're planning things. They've got Aubrey Pleasant is back. Jimmy Lake is back, 2 DB guys. They're bringing Michael Hunter, DB guy, and then the guy from Syracuse. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but linebackers coach. So again, they're laying the foundation for bringing in a lot of new talent. So, we're talking, bringing in 1 or 2 guys. I could see this, a 3 DB draft, maybe more. They got 10 picks right now, comp picks coming. So definitely see that happening. Let's hop back to the offensive side. Talk a little bit about wide receiver 2. Puka Nacua is probably going to get a record-setting contract, $40+ million total over a couple of years. So, Devontae Adams, I mentioned at the top of the show, getting up there in age, missed a couple of games. So, wide receiver 2, Tutu Atwell, probably not going to get re-signed. I'm crossing my fingers that's true this year. What are your thoughts on solving for that?
Yeah, this is another intriguing position. Some fans tend to really like this suggestion. Some absolutely can't stand it, but I would not rule out wide receiver at 13. I think it's firmly in play. I'm not sure who's going to go there. It's really going to just be a matter of what these teams kind of need and prioritize. There's very different body types and usage roles and stuff like that in terms of all these guys. I think Jordan Tyson is just so intriguing. I think that's the perfect Sean McVay kind of player. I know that they've tried to move up in the last 3 drafts for offensive weapons, so I think you'd be foolish to immediately rule out receiver at 13. 3 years ago, obviously, they tried to go up and get Dalton Kincaid. 2 years ago, they tried to do it for Brock Bowers. Then last year, they finally go ahead and get their tight end. But last year, they tried to move up to go get Tetairoa McMillan out of Arizona. So it's very clear to me that the Rams have a specific type of thing they want on offense, and I think Jordan Tyson fits that best among the top 3 in terms of him, Mekhi Lemon, and Carnell Tate. So I wouldn't rule that out at 13. If they don't go wide receiver there, I think it's very fair that they don't. 29, I think, is probably in play. I don't know that that's necessarily the best spot for a receiver. I definitely think 61 in the second round is probably a place to target it potentially. Same thing as in the third round. There's a lot of different body types here. We're talking about guys like Denzel Boston, who has a little more size, or an Omar Cooper Jr., who Daniel Jeremiah called the Ramsiest player in the draft, where, he's more of a slot guy, but he has some incredible yak ability coming out of the slot. Malachi Fields, another guy with size. Zachariah Branch, a guy that kind of plays like Zay Flowers, if that, puts that into perspective. Chris Brazel, Chris Bell, a guy that a lot of people project in the first round that had a torn ACL that now might slip a little bit. Jeremy Bernard, a kind of do it all type. There's just so many different body types here, so many different styles of players. I think, betting on what the Rams are going to do moving forward, they need a receiver 3 instantly this year, and they rotate receiver a lot. I think even if they do take a receiver at 13, let's say, it's not one of these like luxurious style picks. I think that player is generally going to play a lot, 60 upwards of 60, maybe 70% of the snaps. They rotate a lot. They obviously still want to play a lot of 11 personnel. And then, goes without saying, Puka's been hurt a lot in his career. Devontae Adams is up there in age. You can't really imagine that he's going to stay healthy for what the Rams are trying to do is 20 or 21 games. And then they're generally a team that does plan ahead of time, right? So like you mentioned, Devontae Adams probably done after this year. You're going to need a receiver next year anyways. And it would be very smooth of a transition to have a guy in-house right now that instantly takes over that 1B role next year. So, or I should say in 2 years. So, I think it's firmly in play at 13. If they don't go there at 13, I don't necessarily know that 29 is the best spot to go get a guy. It feels a little rich. It could be a potential spot where they want to trade down and potentially target one. But I think 61 is probably a pretty good spot. And for what it's worth, like the free agency class is interesting too. I just don't envision that the Rams would be all too wise spending a lot more money for guys that are not currently in-house on that offensive side of the ball. They need to do a better job of balancing the books right now, and paying the defense a little bit more, and going a little younger and cheaper on offense. I would think that that's probably the best way to do it for the, to solve this issue. So I'm not a huge fan of spending it at wide receiver or, on the offensive side of the ball when it comes to free agency. But, a lot of people have connected guys like Alec Pierce to the Rams, or, Rashid Shaheed, which I definitely understand what they would bring to the offense. It's just hard to envision another $15 to $25 million per year style receiver in this room.
Yeah. I mean, I put Alec Pierce on my list just because it just works too perfectly. But I like what you have to say about this Indiana guy, Omar Cooper Jr. That sounds like a Cooper Kupp replacement if I ever heard one.
I'm not going to lie. The way he looks to me, I'm not saying this is who he's going to be at the next level. He moves very much like a CD Lamb to me. And for what it's worth, Daniel Jeremiah did not have him on his top 50, his initial top 50 prospects in the draft. He just released his newest one, and I believe he's ranked 19th. So that I think does a good job of, telling you how talented this guy is.
Yeah, no kidding. For my second round guy, I circled Elijah Surratt, just because of his size. I mean, nobody's going to call him electric, but speed is not the Rams' necessity necessarily. I mean, obviously everybody loves a speedy receiver, but anything on Surratt? You didn't mention him, but.
Yeah. So I have a style receiver that I prefer to watch and like. For sure. I think that is very fitting for what the Rams have targeted at receiver recently. I think Surratt, I've seen someone say he plays pretty similar to Gabe Davis. I thought that was a pretty interesting comp. For me, I think it's in play, and the one thing I will say about the Rams too is, like, even though the way they act at receiver, I think the other way kind of makes a lot of sense. And what I mean by that is the Rams have been a team that have, like, thrown a lot of money at receiver. They've always tried to go up and go get this guy that's, like, true superstar talent. And I understand why, but they do as good of a job, if not better than anybody in football, when they don't spend premium picks or money at receiver. Puka Nacua is a 5th round pick. Cooper Kupp's a 3rd round pick. Like, they consistently are able to find impact players and top 5 players at the position outside of that, 1st round or 30 million per year type. So that's why it makes sense to me almost to wait at receiver, despite the fact that I know Sean McVay could do incredible things with a really, really high draft pick or a lot of money or whatever. I've seen it too many times to where the Rams are able to find these guys, or Robert Woods. When they paid Robert Woods, nobody expected him to be as impactful as he was, I don't think. And he's turned out to be a huge piece of the Rams, where, they trade for Brandon Cooks, a 1st round pick. They trade for Sammy Watkins. They, I'm forgetting. There's been so much investment at receiver, and they haven't needed it in retrospect. A lot of times the best players at the position they invested the least in initially, and they turn out to be the best players. So.
Yeah, let's hop to tight end, same side of the ball, just because it's so similar. I don't think they want to play as much 13 personnel as they did in 2025 as they will in 2026. I think that was they wanted to play 12. 12 was not working, and they went to 13, and it worked, and they kept pulling that chain because it kept working. So, I mean, they've got 3 guys on the roster right now: Colby Parkinson, Davis Allen, and then Terrence Ferguson. Terrence Ferguson, a very different style of player than those other 2. Oh, well, definitely than Colby Parkinson. I mean, my solve is re-sign Tyler Higbee to a 1-year contract, with a decent compensation behind it. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've thought that through too. I would have no issue with the Rams re-signing Tyler Higbee to a 1-year deal. I think the veteran leadership, the depth makes a lot of sense. He's a good blocker. He could do a little bit of everything really well. I don't know that they shouldn't invest a lot at this position based on how much they've invested in Terrence Ferguson and paying, some of these other guys like Colby Parkinson, like you mentioned. But I think the depth piece here is more so where they should try to target the tight end spot. If they don't bring Higbee back, you got to plan for Davis Allen being gone in a year, Colby Parkinson potentially being gone in a year, and Terrence Ferguson, as much as I like him, he's not your traditional, end of the line, inline type of tight end, at least not at this point in time. So the Rams are going to need a guy like that puts his hand in the dirt and plays, early downs and 2nd and 1 and that type of thing. So I think my preferred route is also just re-signing Tyler Higbee for a year and then refiguring it out kind of next year. But wouldn't shock me at all if round 4, round 5, round 6 potentially, the Rams are looking at guys that they could plug and play, sort of like a Davis Allen, where you're not looking for top 10 tight end production or something like that. You're just more so looking for a guy that can be flexible. You can trot out there in some of these bigger packages and have some of that early down production. Like you said too, though, I don't envision the Rams playing as much 13 personnel this year. I think that was not the ideal structure for them. I think that was more so a matter of, you're dealing with a lot of injuries at receiver. Ultimately, who are you going to trot out there? Your receiver 4 or 5 or your tight end 2? I think, that was sort of a balance of what they had to figure out. And if your 13 personnel is working, it would be foolish not to keep trying to run it out. So I don't think that was ideal for them. And I don't envision a scenario next year where, they're trying to utilize it as much necessarily. So there could be the potential that they don't necessarily value, 3 or 4 tight end deep rotation as much as they did this past year.
Yeah, 100%. Let's finish up with pass rush depth. I think the plan should be to go get a veteran guy, do kind of a Von Miller type situation, guy that can come in and have an instant impact, doesn't have to play a ton, obviously going to be behind Byron Young and Jared Verse. This is another one that's kind of a future planning where, you got 4 guys you're going to have to pay or move on from, Jared Verse, Byron Young, Braden Fisk, and Kobe Turner. 2 of those guys already eligible for new contracts. So this is going to become a big talking point very soon. And, they just weren't able to rotate very much with the guys behind them. I think Josiah Stewart showed some good things, got on the field pretty good. I think, other than that, not much. So I'm just going to throw out Joey Bosa, come back to LA, play a third of the snaps, quarter of the snaps, something like that. I'd like to say Khalil Mack just because I think he's a little bit more durable and his production is going to be a little bit better. But I think he's going to get a bigger contract. And then I'm just going to throw out one more out there just because it's the 3rd year in the row I want this guy on the roster. Calais Campbell, get the old man, get the big man in there, run stuffer, can still rush the passer, and obviously a veteran presence. So throw that in there. What are your thoughts from this position?
Yeah, the ideal structure for me too is a veteran that can play, 40% of snaps if needed. And, you could keep them fresh and healthy going down the stretch. That's why I tend to want a veteran presence there as well. My only thing is, do the Rams value it the way that we do? It's been years where I've been clamoring for a veteran kind of edge 3 behind the younger guys that, can step in a sort of designated pass rush style of role, or a guy that plays 40% of snaps, gives them a breather but can still keep up the production, and they haven't looked to do that. So my only question is now, are they going to look to go young at this spot and in potentially target it in the draft, knowing that they can't, or they probably won't pay all 4 of their defensive linemen, and plan a year ahead, sort of like I was talking about at receiver, where, Byron Young, maybe you're not going to pay him next year. And if that's the case, you're going to need an edge anyways. And this year they can sort of serve as that kind of breather style player and guy that plays 40% of snaps. And then next year is a starter. Or do they go with a veteran presence here and just try to, capitalize on what they got going and really push for a title? The one name that's always been intriguing to me, I look at him every year, it feels like, it's Khalil Mack as well. Like you mentioned, I'm sure he's going to get a pretty hefty deal that's going to be it's going to price the range out of his market, or it's going to price the Rams out of his range on the market, I would assume. But he's up there in age, man. At this point, it's like, you're in LA already. Would you take a little bit less money to go bring chase with the Rams? You're not moving too far. You're 36 or going on 36. They're not going to require, some superstar level play out of you. You're not going to play, 65 snaps a game. To me, that seems like an intriguing scenario for a guy like that you can really easily sell what the Rams have going. And then, the draft is always going to be a spot where I'm looking to beef up the defensive line. And this is one of the positions alongside safety, I think, where 29 in that range, or if they move back a little bit out of 29, that 29 to 45 range is really littered with some interesting names that, I would be highly intrigued by. I would hate to spend a pick that early on an edge rusher, but we see it time and time again, year after year. The teams with the best, trenches, offensive line, defensive line, they always go far in the playoffs. They always have a way to, seemingly win Super Bowls. You saw with Seattle this year, you saw with Philadelphia last year. This is just, you can never have enough guys to rush the passer. So that's a sweet spot for me in the draft there, where the Rams could really legitimately look at an edge rusher to continue to balance the books, like I mentioned there. Even if they do pay 3 out of the 4 defensive linemen, are they really going to pay that 4th guy? I think you need some youth in there that you can have on a cheaper contract where you're not spending a combined, 160 million a year on your defensive line. And this doesn't even take into account the fact that they did also pay Puna Ford, so they're really on the verge of potentially paying 5 guys a lot of money there, which is a good way to build a team. It's just a very difficult way to kind of work around that situation. If you thought the cornerback room was bad before, imagine what a certain position on the roster is going to look like if they're, paying 4 to 5 defensive linemen at a time.
Just real quick, just rank in priority the defensive line, the drafted guys. Mine's Verse, Turner, Young, Fisk. What about you?
Okay, mine would be Verse, Turner as well. It would probably be Young, Fisk as well. I could be talked into flipping those last 2. I think the first 2 I'm pretty firmly stuck in on. Like for me this offseason, you can't get out of this offseason without paying Puka and Kobe Turner. And after that, you figure the rest out. But I think I agree with your ranking. Yeah.
What do you think about Avila? Are they signing him early? Are they? I have no idea. I'm just throwing that out there because I have 0 sense.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's the one that I have sort of a question mark on as well. Just trying to figure out how much do they value him? You got to take in his injury history into account. And then of course, Kevin Dotson's coming up on a deal pretty soon as well. I believe next year is his last year, meaning 2027, not 2026. Avila, I would probably try to pay, depending on what the price tag is there. But again, similar to D-line, it's like, you're paying your left tackle, you're paying your right guard a lot of money. Warren McClendon is up for a deal here pretty soon. Do they pay him? Do you pay Avila? If so, you're paying 4 out of the 5, a lot of money. There has to be some cheap talent somewhere. So that's a position that generally you don't have to spend, a top 30 pick on to get a quality player. So, if the Rams do view that as one spot where they can cut costs and save money and still plug a good player in there, that would be okay. But, I'm always in favor of paying homegrown talent. So if that's a possibility where they can feel good about the contract, I would urge them to try to get that done as well.
All right. I just wanted to talk about one more position just because he's my guy. And Justin Sternat, Denver Broncos linebacker. I don't think he's ranked anywhere. I listened to Oliver Connolly over at the Read Optional podcast. That's where he came onto my radar. He's a pass rusher. He's good in production. He's good in coverage. And I would say that those are 2 things that the Rams could use at that position. And I think he's a fun and exciting player to add in that. Very, very athletic, 17 pressures, 5 sacks. Just to add another layer to the pass rush. Do you have any wild cards that you would throw in there like that you would want the Rams to consider, draft or free agency?
In terms of linebacker or just in general?
Just anywhere.
Yeah. Shoot. D'Angelo Pons is a name at corner that I really, really like. I think there's not really anything too crazy on my radar in terms of, a position that you wouldn't necessarily expect. I think Ty Simpson was one we talked about a lot. I really like his game. Obviously super risky, but with risk comes a high reward as well. I wouldn't say there's any risk crazy.
At some point. There's going to be a risk replacing a quarterback. It's 100%. Yeah,
100%. That's right. That's kind of the ultimate kind of factor there is, if you strike at quarterback and it works out well, you're never going to get another pick that's going to move the needle as much for you, as much as that position will, not to mention being on a, cheap rookie contract. You talk about the last half hour, we're talking about paying all these guys. That's a good way to be able to save a lot of money there and be able to pay a lot of these guys. So I don't necessarily think there's any one crazy position that I'm looking at that I think would shock people. I think, cornerback, they probably double dip. 2 additions at least, whether that's one via free agency or trade, and then one via draft. I would like to see 3 personally. I would be okay with addressing safety. I think there's a couple names there that are interesting. Bud Clark, I mentioned, was one. Linebacker, I think, has to be in play for me personally. I'm very over the experiment that the Rams have kind of trotted out there for years now. I think at some point, you really, really need to upgrade the room. And that, the Rams are close here. So we're kind of grasping at straws, trying to really nitpick. But, this is a situation where had they had a little bit more talent on defense this past year, do they get the job done? Probably, maybe. And it's, difficult to think about that. But that's where the Rams are at now. They're right in the discussion. They got to be able to capitalize. I think they got to toe the line between getting aggressive while still thinking about the future a little bit. And that's why I mentioned, I believe I tweeted this out at one point, the only things that really to me would be off the table at this point in time is I wouldn't move the 13th pick unless they're moving up. And I would not move next year's first round pick just as a precaution to potentially needing to go get that quarterback. I think you need to keep that card in your back pocket. Otherwise, I think, whatever it costs to go get some of these veterans, you try to figure that out. And if that means, pushing money in the future, that's that. If that means, trading a second and a 4th round pick or a 3rd round pick to go get a Trent McDuffie, I think that needs to be in play. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, I think that's all we've got. I've extended this amount of time as much as possible. I could talk to this guy all day long if he gave me the opportunity to, but he's a busy guy, so we'll get him out of here. Yeah, he's a Los Angeles Rams fan, but he's got smart process and he's a ball knower. It's a rare combination we got here. So it's always an honor to have Sosa Kremenjas over on the show. Anything you want to promote? Anything we can help you out with on our end?
Not too much. Just go follow the Underdog NFL account. We're gearing up for free agency right now. We're going to be super active. Going to be an absolutely chaotic time. And the combine, before that. And after that, it's kind of smooth sailing all the way to the draft. So I'm plugged in just like everyone else, and I'm excited to see how things shake out.
Yeah, it feels like a calm before the storm. I don't know. There's something about right now where everything is about to happen. So we appreciate you guys for tuning in. Check us out. Like and subscribe as always. Go check out LAFBnetwork.com for all of our written content. And keep checking us out on YouTube for more stuff like this. See you soon, guys.
Hey, Ramley, thank you so much for hanging out with us and watching the Rams LAFB show. Quickly before you go, got to tell you about our friends over at Sleeper. It's the #1 sports app right now, and you've got to download it because it's got so many great features that I want to tell you about. Aside from season-long fantasy, which is the best in the business, they've also got live score trackers, in-game updates, plus the live chat where you can actually communicate with other users right on the app. But perhaps the best feature, at least that I like, is the daily fantasy feature or the live pick'em. Just pick 2 to 8 players across any sport, baseball, basketball, hockey, obviously football and our Rams. You're going to choose a player, just choose more or less. Matthew Stafford, more or less passing yards. Kyron Williams, more or less rushing yards, more or less touchdowns. 2 to 8, you can win real money. So when you go to make your first deposit, make sure you use our promo code RAMSLAFB, and Sleeper's going to give you a match bonus up to $100. So you deposit $100, they're going to give you $100 free. You're now sitting at $200. You put in $10, they're going to match you $10. You're now sitting at $20. But on top of that, right now, Sleeper is offering all new user signups a $20 free entry, no deposit required. Go sign up. You're automatically invested $20 straight from Sleeper. But you can stack that offer with that match bonus offer to add more money. Just make sure to use that promo code RAMSLAFB. Go check out Sleeper. Download it today. Tell them the guys at the Rams LAFB sent you. And as always, Ramley, thank you so much for making us a part of your day.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.